The murder of Shanda Sharer, a case of teenage jealousy and brutal revenge. The murder of Shanda Sharer in 1992 remains one of the most horrifying and senseless crimes ever committed by teenagers in the United States. Shanda Sharer, a 12-year-old girl from New Albany, Indiana, was brutally tortured and murdered by 4 teenage girls in a crime motivated by jealousy, anger, and revenge. The case shocked the nation, not only because of the extreme violence involved but also because of the young ages of both the victim and her killers. Shanda Sharer, a promising young girl. Shanda Renee Sharer was born on June 6, 1979, in Pineville, Kentucky, and moved with her family to New Albany, Indiana, where she was a bright and outgoing student. In 1991, she enrolled at Hazelwood Middle School, where she met Amanda Heverin, a girl 1 year older than her. Amanda and Shanda developed a close friendship, and Amanda introduced Shanda to her group of friends. However, Amanda had previously been in a romantic relationship with a girl named Melinda Loveless, who would become the central figure in the events that led to Shanda's murder. Melinda Loveless, the jealous ex at the time. Melinda Loveless was a 16-year-old girl with a troubled upbringing. Her family life had been marred by abuse and dysfunction, and she had become possessive and jealous in her relationships. After Amanda Heverin began dating Shanda, Melinda became increasingly angry and obsessed with Shanda, perceiving her as a threat to her relationship with Amanda. Melinda's jealousy grew into a deep-seated hatred for Shanda, and she began expressing her desire to harm the 12-year-old girl. This toxic obsession culminated in a tragic and violent plan to teach Shanda a lesson, which quickly spiraled into a brutal murder. The plot, a deadly plan of revenge. Melinda Loveless enlisted the help of 3 other teenage girls, Lori Tackett, 17, Hope Rippey, 15, and Toni Lawrence, 15, to carry out her plan to abduct and harm Shanda. On the night of January 10, 1992, the 4 girls drove to Shanda's home in New Albany. Disguising their intentions, Hope Rippey and Toni Lawrence knocked on Shanda's door and convinced her to come with them, claiming that Amanda wanted to see her. Trusting the girls, Shanda agreed to go with them. What followed was a horrific series of events that would lead to Shanda's death. The abduction and torture of Shanda Sharer. Shanda was driven to a remote location, where Melinda Loveless was waiting. Once Shanda was in the car, the group began to torment and terrorize her. Melinda immediately began threatening Shanda with a knife, expressing her jealousy over Shanda's relationship with Amanda. From there, the violence escalated rapidly. Shanda was driven to an abandoned house in Madison, Indiana, where the 4 girls took turns torturing her over the course of several hours. She was beaten, strangled, and stabbed multiple times. The girls also burned her with cigarette lighters and sexually assaulted her with a tire iron. Throughout the night, they subjected Shanda to unspeakable cruelty, all while she pleaded for her life. Despite the extensive torture, Shanda remained alive. In a final, sickening act of violence, the girls placed her in the trunk of their car and drove around for hours. Eventually, they decided to finish the job. The murder, burned alive in the early morning hours of January 11, 1992, the girls stopped at a gas station, where they purchased a 2-liter bottle of gasoline. They drove Shanda to a rural field near Madison, where they pulled her, still alive but gravely injured, from the trunk of the car. Melinda Loveless and Lori Tackett poured gasoline on Shanda's body and set her on fire. Shanda, still clinging to life, was burned alive. The 4 girls then left the scene and returned to their homes, seemingly unaffected by the brutality of their actions. The discovery of Shanda Sharer's body later that same morning. Shanda's burned body was discovered by a couple driving through the rural area. They immediately contacted the police, and an investigation began. The horrific nature of the crime shocked the authorities, who were initially unsure of the victim's identity due to the extent of her injuries. Meanwhile, Toni Lawrence, one of the 4 girls involved in the murder, began to break down emotionally and confessed the crime to a friend. This confession led to her arrest, and she quickly implicated the other 3 girls in the murder of Shanda Sharer. The arrests and trials, all 4 girls were arrested and charged with murder. Due to the heinous nature of the crime, they were tried as adults, despite their young ages. The trials revealed the shocking details of the murder, and the extent of the torture that Shanda had endured was described in graphic detail. Melinda Loveless, the ringleader, pleaded guilty to murder in 1993 and was sentenced to 60 years in prison. She had been the driving force behind the attack and showed little remorse for her actions. Lori Tackett, who had been just as involved in the torture and killing, also pleaded guilty and received a 60-year sentence. Hope Rippey was sentenced to 60 years, with 10 years suspended due to her younger age and perceived lesser involvement. She was released from prison in 2006 after serving 14 years. Toni Lawrence, who had played a lesser role in the crime, was sentenced to 20 years in prison. She was released on parole in 2000 after serving 9 years. Aftermath and impact: the murder of Shanda Sharer sent shockwaves through Indiana and the nation. The brutal nature of the crime, coupled with the young ages of both the victim and her killers, left the public grappling with how teenagers could commit such a heinous act. The case also raised questions about the role of peer pressure, jealousy, and emotional instability in acts of extreme violence. Shanda's mother, Jacqueline Vaught, became a vocal advocate for victims' rights and sought justice for her daughter through her public appearances and interviews. Over the years, she has expressed her ongoing grief and the deep pain of losing her daughter in such a brutal way. She also campaigned for changes in the juvenile justice system to ensure that children who commit serious crimes face appropriate consequences. Release and rehabilitation: since the trials, Hope Rippey and Toni Lawrence have both been released from prison, though they live under new identities. Melinda Loveless and Lori Tackett served long sentences, with Loveless released on parole in 2019 after serving 26 years in prison. The release of the perpetrators has been met with mixed reactions from the public and Shanda's family. In a surprising twist, Melinda Loveless reportedly sought some degree of redemption by participating in a prison program where she trained service dogs for wounded veterans. Despite her efforts, the memory of her involvement in the brutal murder of Shanda Sharer continues to weigh heavily on those who followed the case. Legacy of Shanda Sharer: Shanda Sharer's life was cut tragically short by a senseless act of violence driven by jealousy and hatred. Her death serves as a stark reminder of the capacity for cruelty, even among teenagers, and the destructive power of unchecked emotions. The murder left a lasting scar on her family and the community, and the case continues to be studied as an example of teenage violence and the need for better intervention in troubled youths' lives. For those who knew and loved Shanda, her memory endures. Though her life was brutally taken, the impact of her story has led to increased awareness of the dangers of jealousy, bullying, and the importance of addressing emotional and psychological issues among young people before they escalate into violence.